Hi, my name is Mónica Ramírez, and I am the founder and president of Justice for Migrant Women. I'm also one of the co-conveners of the Survivor Summit, and we are so thrilled that you are all here with us. Why did we create the Survivor Summit? We created the Survivor Summit because we know that survivors have the answers. We believe that political leaders have a responsibility to drive change that matches the energy of the movement. We also understand that it is time for survivors to come together to create the vision for the world without violence. In the lead up to the third anniversary of the Me Too movement, we are heartened by the continued outpouring of support, love, and leadership of survivors and allies.
I'm Fatima Goss. I'm president of the National Women's Law Center. So we came together because we wanted to center the power of survivors as a political bloc to be taken seriously. Sexual violence shows up in every quarter, in every state, in every sector, in every community. It doesn't include or preclude someone from its wrath because of party affiliation, and millions of survivors across this country are voters, yet we haven't been taken seriously as a voting bloc. So we set out to change this, and in order to do it, we knew we had to come together to continue on our own healing journeys, but we also had to create a roadmap for change, a roadmap for healing to help us on our journeys, and a roadmap to get to the end goal of ending sexual violence.
And so how do we come together? We came together to create the Survivors Summit based on an idea that emerged as we were considering the next bold steps in the Me Too movement as we were looking toward the second anniversary. First, we laid out a vision statement and a call to action through our open letter that was published in the New York Times titled "To Those Who Seek a Better World." This Survivor Summit and the Survivors Agenda were the next two goals that we set for ourselves in the lead up to the 2020 election. I love my squad, Tarana Burke, Ijempu, and Fatima, because when I tossed out the idea of calling together a mass convening of survivors, they did not think of the barriers. They thought about how to get it done. And it was because of that energy around this idea and the commitment to pulling together something as beautiful as this summit that we've been able to move forward with this idea, and here we are bringing it to fruition. We're committed to not only celebrating the next few days with one another as survivors who are building power, but we're also here to announce our agenda and our vision for the future.
So we are so proud of this agenda that was co-created with survivors around this country. A number of organizations lent their expertise. 1,000 people gathered together to give their information through kitchen table conversations, through town halls, through providing and showing up through a first survey of its kind. And this agenda is fulsome. It's an agenda that details the needs and solutions for survivors to feel safe in community and alternatives to the criminal legal system, naming that our solutions must actually center survivors at every point.
The Survivor Summit is anchored by the Me Too movement, Justice for Migrant Women, National Domestic Workers Alliance, and the National Women's Law Center. Many organizations have lent their expertise, wisdom, and ideas to help us shape this event and to help us co-create this agenda. You'll hear from some of them over the course of the next couple of days through panel workshops and presentations. There will also be a youth track anchored by our partners at the Me Too movement. Many, many, many people are responsible for making this summit possible and for making the agenda possible. We'd love to thank Alicia J. and a whole team of individuals who made this project possible. And it's because of them that we are all together this weekend.
So let's get to the agenda. The agenda names and details solutions for survivors to feel safe in community and alternatives to the criminal legal system. We know that survivors need solutions that protect them from immediate harm, as well as solutions to prevent the root causes of violence.
The agenda calls for a transformation of culture that centers the experiences of all survivors, a culture that doesn't tolerate or make excuses for the abuse, violence, or harassment by those in power, a culture that is supportive of survivors of sexual violence.
The agenda also calls for a meaningful shift in education to actually make it the case that students can learn with safety and with dignity, and that schools can have a chance to create communities where students can gain an education free from violence and where they can feel safe and attain the quality knowledge in schools and tools that they need to thrive.
The agenda calls for healing justice. Those who have been harmed by sexual violence should be treated with care and compassion and given access to the support and services they need and want without barriers based on money or identity.
And it's an agenda that names that sexual violence is a public health issue and calls for trauma-informed, culturally competent, linguistically appropriate, and identity-affirming healthcare that addresses both the immediate trauma and the long-term physical and mental aspects of sexual violence.
The agenda details solutions to make it possible to work with dignity, free from the threat of sexual violence, including sexual harassment. Survivors must lead and be at the center of this movement for change. Workers must be able to build power collectively and advocate for what is best for them and their loved ones.
And the agenda names that survivors deserve access to housing and transportation that is affordable, safe, reliable, and maintains their dignity and discretion. This is especially true for Black survivors and survivors of color and low-income survivors, for LGBTQ survivors, undocumented survivors, and disabled survivors.
This Survivor Summit is by and for survivors, particularly centering the experiences of survivors of color. It is for women, men, children, non-binary people, and people of all races, colors, religions, abilities, sexual orientation and preference, and for all income strata. Our movement is one that is for all of us, and our priorities can't be clearly articulated if we are not all at the table. We are inspired by the leadership of survivors across the United States and across the globe. Your courage makes us powerful. Your persistence makes us unstoppable. And your wisdom makes us stronger as we continue on this journey, personally and as a collective, to create a better world, one that is safe from gender-based violence.
This is a program that centers survivors, and it is meant to provide information and tools and resources and inspiration to those of us who do the daily work of survivorship and those who seek to journey alongside us as we do this work. And so it's now our honor to introduce our first inaugural panel.
We are now thrilled to introduce our panelists, Prentice Hemphill, Breana Braveheart, and Anita Hill.
Hi all, I feel so grateful to be a part of this first ever Survivor Summit. My name is Prentice Hemphill. I am a healing justice facilitator, a transformative justice practitioner, a somatics teacher and practitioner, and I facilitate in movement spaces, especially Black movement. My commitment over the years has been to bring trauma healing deeply into movement spaces so that we can recover our capacity and be the brilliant, connected leaders that we are intended to be. I have been the Healing Justice Director at Black Lives Matter. I am currently the founder of the Black Embodiment Initiative, and I'm the host of Finding Our Way podcast. I'm really happy to be here.
Kihaniwashte, Imachiapi Makbia Sapowi. Hi, my name is Breana Braveheart. My Lakota name is Makbia Sapawi, which is Black Cloud Woman. I'm 15 years old. I'm a 10th grader at Littlewood High School, and I'm coming to you from the Black Hills.
Hello, thank you, Mónica and Fatima. I'm Anita Hill. I'm a university professor at Brandeis University. I am also an out counsel to a law firm, Cohen Milstein, Sellers and Toll, and I chair the Hollywood Commission. And I mentioned all three of my roles because I do believe that ending sexual violence has to come with complex approaches and multiple ways of thinking about the problem, whether through the legal system, through teaching and learning, or whether through policy and rulemaking with employers. And I'm really excited to be here today. I'm very excited about this agenda, and I look forward to being in conversation with my fellow panelists, Prentice and Breana.
Thank you so much for being with us. We are just going to jump right into our conversation about why it's important to build a powerful movement for survivors. Anita, let's start with you.
Well, this is so important to me personally, and I know it speaks to a lot of survivors who are out there and who may be my age or even older, who have been waiting years for something like this summit to bring us all together. Back in 1991, after I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was a wave of women who came forward, who sued, brought lawsuits, who challenged their workplace situations. But even in that moment when we saw an uptick in the public conversation, as well as in the court cases, there was a sense that people were working on their own, that we were working alone, and that there wasn't really any organizing around all of us getting together to solve the problems as a whole, taking all of our differences into account, but understanding that there were some real commonalities in our experiences. We have moved beyond that point where we were in the 90s to really better thinking about sexual violence. And it's been taught to us in our schools. I think it's been part of the public conversation, but we really didn't have that full sense of what the community was like until the Me Too movement, a hashtag social media movement in 2017. That really has galvanized us. And now I think what you see today and what this summit represents is that coming together and understanding that we have to deal with policies, we've got to demand resources from our government, and we have to be seen as a political force in order to reach our full potential. And so I'm really excited about what we're doing today. And in my experience, there has not ever been anything like this.
Thank you so much, Anita, for your answer and for all of your leadership. Breana, we'd love to hear from you. Why do you believe it's important for survivors to build a powerful movement?
I feel it's important because as a youth, I am surviving MMIW, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And I was at the Standing Rock movement, and there were 19 women who were sexually abused and who were violated. And I had went to a homeschooling there, and one of my teachers had to walk me to and from my camp because she was worried that I was gonna get violated or something terrible was gonna happen. And I think it's important that we speak about this because it's not really talked about. And as a youth, you know, I'm even scared to take out the trash sometimes because I worry about, you know, getting kidnapped or something happening.
Thank you, Breana, for all of your important work. And Prentice, why is it important in your mind that we build a powerful movement for survivors?
I think it's important, and I'm answering this question both as a practitioner, a healing practitioner, but also as a survivor myself of sexual assault. And I think it's so important because it connects so many of us. And it also is a way for us to tell the truth about what really happens in our workspaces, what really happens inside of our communities, what happens in our home. And I think for that reason, because it impacts so many of us, to build a movement, it could be one of the most significant movements, and it has been one of the most significant movements we've ever seen. And I think it has the potential to really reshape our cultural spaces, reshape our intimate spaces, to allow for authentic relationship, allow for boundaries, allow for healing. A movement really has the potential to do some deep work to really reshape who we can be together and what our relationships with each other and with our communities can be. So for that reason, I think it's really critical that we do this work now.
So when we were creating this agenda with survivors around this country, we were really intentional of thinking about who was at the table and who do we need to take extra steps to reach out to. I'm hoping to start with you, Prentice, about who is often left out of the conversations about survivors that we should be centering, and or what are the sorts of issues that you think it's especially important right now for us to shed light on?
Thank you for that question. I think the movement, it's really necessary that we do this, what you're talking about, that we start to look to the other folks who have experienced this. And I think oftentimes non-binary people, gender non-conforming people, trans people, disabled people, migrant workers, and all the ways that we disappear the experiences of Black and Brown people also. I think those people's stories are often not at the forefront because we disappear those folks' stories in general. Also the stories of men, also the stories of cisgendered men too, around their experiences of sexual violence. And I think that as the movement starts to create more space for those stories to come to the forefront, the potential to eliminate the experiences of shame that kind of shape our inability to speak to our own experiences, the ability for the movement to grow and become more nuanced and clear about what it is that we are working to end. I think those are some of the places that it's going to be really important to look and shine some light on so that the movement continues to grow and grow with a relevance and a truth-telling power and potential that it has. And I think just to your question, pose a kind of brief point, is that I think it's really important to begin to answer the question of what do we do? And Ms. Hill at the top spoke about the need to have a multi-pronged approach. And I think being able to have some strategy or clarity around what it means to heal. What do we do about the harm in our communities when so much harm happens in our kind of close quarters, in our communities and in our homes? The question of what do we do is a really important one to begin to dig into.
Thank you, Prentice. Breana, I have the same question for you. Who do we need to center And what are the issues that you think are particularly important that we name right now?
Well, I think it's important that we center young Indigenous youth and women, because they're not really talked about, and you know, most young Indigenous women aren't really vocal about, or they don't really talk about their stories, because they're shamed on for maybe the incident that happened. And as a cheerleader, you know, I am confident to wear my uniform at school, but in public, I know I wouldn't really be confident because of catcalling and abduction.
Thank you, Breana. Anita, I would love to hear your thoughts about who to center and what are the issues that we really need to make visible.
Well, Prentice and Breana did such a wonderful job of really articulating who gets erased and who gets disappeared from this conversation. I'm going to take a little bit different approach, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why is it that people are being disappeared. And there's some very obvious and specific reasons. We live in a society that is ageist, that is where age discrimination exists and bias exists, and therefore we don't talk about the experiences, or don't even in many instances include the experience of sexual violence against the elderly. We live in a country that is racist, and where elements of racism and society pervade just about every part of our living. We're just now realizing that, I mean, in very, very graphic ways, with the violence against George Floyd and Breonna Taylor this year, as well as the COVID pandemic. So when we think about who is missing, we need to think about what is causing us to be disappeared, and race is one of them. So you don't hear the story of racial minorities. You don't hear intersectional stories of the kind of responses that are happening to people who experience sexual abuse, where their integrity is questioned because of their identity. And finally, we live in a society that is trans and homophobic. And it's stifling our conversations about men, because we adhere to the myth that real men know how to handle sexual assault and sexual aggression. And that really comes from a sense of homophobia, a feeling, sentiments of homophobia that exist throughout our society. So that rather than deal with what is behind us, not hearing the stories, we just pretend they don't exist. And so I really believe that we want to bring those voices to the front. We want, and I could go on about ableism. You know, I was in an event in December, and this African-American woman came. She has a disability, had raised claims of sexual harassment in her workplace. She wasn't taken seriously. And it's who knows whether it was because of her race or her disability, or whether it was the myth that we have around sexual harassment, that it is about sexual attraction as opposed to abusive and violative behavior. And so we could go on and on about the people who are missing, but if we really want to understand the people who are missing, we have to understand the biases that live throughout our culture. And so we need to bring people forward, bring their voices forward, but we have to look behind their stories and look at what the root cause of their erasure is.
Well, thank you guys, because it's clear our truth telling, our solutions will not be what they need to be if we don't understand who is not here and the reason that they're not here.
Thank you all so much for your powerful responses and for joining us here today for this inaugural summit. We're grateful to each of you for all of the insight and wisdom that you've brought to the conversation. And we'd love to hear from you on some of your closing thoughts for those who are tuning in. Breana, what is some advice that you have for people who would like to get involved to help make change to address this issue of sexual violence?
Well, I wanted to talk about the Sacagawea and Pocahontas. They were 15 years old, and I'm 15 years old, and they were raped and abducted by white men. And you know, not very many people know about that. And women, Indigenous women are 3 times more likely to be raped. The reason why I brought up Pocahontas and Sacagawea was because they were the very first young Indigenous women to experience MMIW. And I want to encourage all young women or all women of all cultures to bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And one of my friends, actually, she went missing, and I played on a volleyball team with her since I was in 5th grade, and she still hasn't been found.
Prentice, what are your thoughts? Why is it important to build a powerful movement of survivors of sexual violence?
Thank you for that question. I feel like organizing and movement building can be deeply healing practices. And part of healing, part of what it takes to heal is the restoration of our safety, our sense of safety, our sense of belonging, and our sense of dignity, which can be done through the ways that we take action in the world and change the conditions that we're all living in. So I think this work that you all are doing, this summit and these opportunities for engagement could actually really be a part of a healing trajectory. If we're able to make larger meaning from our stories and take action that changes things, it can be deeply affirming. I also feel that in general, we have, this is a moment of a lot of activity, a lot of action, a lot of movement building. And really all of our movements could do with a deeper analysis of sexual violence and the ways that it permeates our movement spaces, as Breana was speaking to earlier, and it permeates our kind of the culture we bring to spaces too. So the potential for this movement in spaces like this is to transform what already exists. So as we're taking this action, as we're changing conditions, to actually make sure that these spaces are really centered around justice and really looking for those folks and experiences that get disappeared, really reveals the way we've normalized sexual violence and refuses to tolerate it. So I think moving this agenda forward, bringing this kind of clarity to all of our movements is a deeply important effort for all of us. So I think our healing is always about safety, belonging, and dignity, being able to tell our stories, but tell our stories in a way that creates broader meaning. And I think we can do that, and we have to do that both on the individual levels, on the community level, and on the larger societal level to make significant change.
Anita, what are your closing thoughts on how we can continue to strengthen and grow this movement to end sexual violence?
Thank you. I would just like to say that really what you have seen, what I've experienced in Breana's words, as well as Prentice, is true bravery. I mean, it takes a lot, and I don't know that I could have done it at 15 years old, for Breana to talk about her real fears and the situation of Native women throughout this country and throughout the history of this country. Prentice, it takes bravery to really talk about the problem of sexual violence within movements that we know exists, but we have a hard time talking about because we're fighting so many battles within our own movements and within our own communities. So I would simply say that I think the way forward is for us to be brave, to be willing to tell the truth about our experiences, to expect and get support from fellow survivors, and to find a way for each of us, in whatever way we express our survivorship, even if we express it still as victimhood, find a way for us to be our true, authentic selves and to believe that, in fact, we deserve better in this country. And we deserve the attention of policymakers who are making the rules that will shape our safety and our well-being for the future. And so I'm very thankful for this gathering. I'm thankful for this plenary that starts us off. And I am hopeful that we may not know the way forward exactly at this point, but I am very hopeful and optimistic that by the end of this summit, we will have many ways of looking forward in a positive direction that will make life better for all of us.
I'm so grateful to you, Prentice, Breana, and Anita, for your words, your work, your wisdom, your leadership. This session was just the first session of the summit, and I already feel both inspired and fired up. I feel challenged, and I feel ready, and we hope that you feel the same. Please stay tuned for the rest of the summit and for the publication of the Survivors Agenda. We want you to read it. We want you to use it. We want to hear from you and get feedback on it. We hope it is a living document that continues to evolve as our movement and our work evolves. We hope it will be a guidepost for all of us, for political leaders, and for the public about what it will take to create a country and a world where we can all feel safe from sexual violence. So thank you for being with us, and we will see you the rest of this week.